So I got good news if you're watching this video from China, which I'm not sure there's many of you, but Tesla has updated the made in China options for the Model 3, which has some options that haven't even been available in the US in a while, which is kind of cool. But so yeah, up until recently, the only Model 3 you could buy that was made in China was the standard range configuration, which is priced quite a bit higher than it is here if you do the currency translations. But I think that's primarily because Tesla wants to retain that higher profit margin at first. And also China has a bunch of electric vehicle incentives that are still active right now, incentives that we no longer have in the US. So it makes less sense for Tesla to price their vehicles that high. So they're basically like, hey, once you factor in the incentives, you can save a ton of money. So it's okay if we get to benefit from that capital. But yeah, the main point of this video, long range rear wheel drive Model 3s are now available and they're supposed to start deliveries by this June, which in case you didn't know, Giga Shanghai has been ramping production very, very quickly. They delivered around 3,900 vehicles in February and over 10,000 vehicles in March, so it appears that Model 3 demand is very, very high there, especially now that you can order the long range and performance variants, which it's bizarre, they don't actually have the long range dual motor variant there. They just have performance for dual motor, and then if you want long range, then there's just a rear wheel drive option, which on that website it says it's a 415 mile range, but don't freak out, that's not actually very accurate because it's not being measured by the EPA, which is a lot closer to actual real world range, whereas the standard they're using over in China is very, very generous. So it's not a 415 mile range, but it's definitely well into the 300s. In fact, for those who didn't know, the long range rear wheel drive option for the Model 3 that used to be available here in the US, not anymore sadly, before the more recent software updates that allowed for better power efficiency, you could get 325 miles estimated by the EPA off of that vehicle. And maybe because the profit margins on it weren't very good and Tesla needed to prioritize revenue streams at the time, they decided to axe that version, and now they say if you want rear wheel drive you have to do standard range, and if you want long range you need dual motor drive. So that kind of sucks. Maybe it prioritizes profit over here, but I have a few theories on why perhaps Tesla was okay with reviving the rear wheel drive long range option, which most of which comes from the fact that this is a new factory. Okay, so the fact that they had built Model 3s before, you know, they've kind of got the science down to it. They know how much of it needs to be automated, how much of it needs to be done by people, and once they decided to build this factory, which was built very, very quickly, mind you, they had a better idea of how to maximize efficiency with this new factory line. So because the Model 3 assembly lines in Fremont were kind of, you know, experimental originally because they had never built this many vehicles before, so when they originally set up those lines, they probably arranged them in ways that they weren't anticipating they would have to change later, and they weren't anticipating that automation wouldn't be as crucial as a role as it actually is. So that's part of my guess as to why they can afford to do the long range rear wheel drive option there. Yes, I'm sure the profit margin on that vehicle is probably a lot lower than what it would be in the US, but because we know manufacturing and labor costs are way cheaper in China compared to the US, they probably have much lower operating costs at that factory, as well as the tax breaks, which means that they can collect a lot more on that vehicle. Because if you look at the actual price compared to what we pay for Tesla Model 3s in the US, they do seem quite a bit higher. So Tesla is taking advantage of those tax incentives, which definitely makes sense. And because this factory, I'm guessing, was built a lot more efficiently because it only had one task in mind when it was being built, whereas the Fremont factory, you know, that was built long before Tesla bought it, and they're also producing Model S, X, and Y. Giga Shanghai, all it has to do is build Model 3, and they knew exactly how to build the Model 3 since they even started laying concrete. So that's my guess as to why they're like, you know what, long range rear wheel drive, if it's made in China, yeah, you can order that model. But it just really makes me wish they would bring that model back here in the US, because I know for a ton of you, dual motor is awesome. It provides great traction and also amazing performance that the rear wheel drive option didn't provide. But I think there's enough climates and there's enough areas in the US that don't really have to worry too much about ice or losing that much traction in the more warmer climates, that people just want to get the most range they can for the lowest possible price point. So there's plenty of people out there that don't care about performance, and not to mention rear wheel drive Model 3 is still a very, very high performing car more for the price. So it's not really that the performance is bad, it's just not as great as dual motor. And from what I've heard, it was a very, very popular configuration before Tesla took it down. So my hope is that hopefully with the increased profit margins from Giga Shanghai and maybe growth in numbers from the Model Y and more people buying that SUV, perhaps they can bring back the long-range rear-wheel drive option for the Model 3, because maybe less people will be going for it anyway, so they don't need to prioritize profit margins as much as they do in more recent history. Though we're in a pandemic, it is tough right now, so I'm sure money is tight, and maybe it's going to be a Chinese exclusive for the foreseeable future, which kind of sucks, unless of course you're watching this from China, in which case congratulations, you know, you get to have this exclusive model that's not available in the US anymore. So yeah, as long as they're providing the hardware 3.0 chips in the Chinese models, then yeah, you're finally able to get it on day one with hardware 3 and long-range rear-wheel drive. Congratulations, but for the rest of us, dang, this sucks. Why can't they just import them from China? I guess that defeats the whole made in China purpose. But what do you guys think of this being an exclusive feature from Giga Shanghai, and would you like to see it come back, or are there points I'm missing? Feel free to let me know down in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching today's video, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Take care.